Hello again, and welcome back to another tutorial on SDL inputs. Today we're going to cover mapping. Um, s- but before that, sorry about the tutorial for the gamepad. I had a lot of issues trying to get it implemented. I couldn't find any documentation on it, so yeah, I'm going to have to put that on the back burner for now. However, what we're going to cover today is hopefully going to outweigh that video. Um, so you might be asking yourself, what is mapping? Well, mapping is a way to bind keys in an implicit manner, and it also allows us to unify both the mouse and keyboard, and if you have a gamepad installed, you can also do the gamepad as well. One major benefit of mapping is that you can implicitly set up a key binding rather than it being explicit. Let's say, for example, if we call key hit, for example, and we pass a scan code, we don't have to, with mapping, we don't have to implicitly call a key. It also allows for user configuration, which is definitely a benefit. Let me show you an example with an actual game. Minecraft has the ability of doing key mapping. Let's wait till it loads up. Excuse me. Come on. Be nice to me. Sorry about this is taking so long. I have to load everything. And Java's a very slow language at times. Oh well, here it is. Let's go to controls. This is kind of an example of what I'm talking about, key mapping. Let's say if you want to attack and destroy something, you have button 1 for the mouse. You want to drop an item, for example, you can press the Q button. Pick up a block, you have button 3, which is the right mouse button, and so forth. That's kind of what we're going to work on today. Our way of doing it for now, because we don't have a UI of any sort, we're going to use a text file to do our configuration, but that will come later in tutorials. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to need is a way to store the mapping. And we're going to keep this very simple. We're going to make a structure called struct mapping. And what this is going to have is uint8 called bk. What this is going to hold is both a mouse button and a keyboard key. We also need a Boolean value to kind of separate both the mouse from the keyboard, and this is just going to be simply called isMouse. We need to make a constructor for this. Just keep things simple, and mapping uint8 bk bool isMouse. Let's set the default to false because there's more keyboard keys than there are mouse buttons. This bk equals bk, and this isMouse equals isMouse. Okay. So how do we store the key mappings? Well, I think the easiest way to do this, let's make a mapping global section, is to store it as a standard library map. And we're going to do lookups using strings. So let's do mapping, and we're just going to simply call this mapping. So now that we have this, we need a way to basically add a map to this standard library map, or dictionary. It's probably a better name for it. We need a way to check for if the mapping is either having a hit, mapping functions. Let's just do it this way. We need to check to see if we need to add a mapping. We also need to do a mapping hit for if you just press once, and we also need to say mapping press if you want to keep the key down. So let's do a static void add mapping, and we're going to pass this std string name key, and we're going to pass this a constant mapping static void mapping hit, and we're just going to simply check the key, and static void mapping press std string key. These look pretty similar to the key hit, key press from the keyboard, and the mouse button hit and the mouse button press from the mouse. Well, you probably guessed correctly. They follow kind of a similar pattern. So let's go all the way down to the bottom of our example, and let's implement our friends here. Okay. The first thing we want to do is implement this. And the simplest way to do this is add mapping, and we're going to set the mapping key to key, and then we're simply going to add this in like this. It's a pretty simple method. Excuse me. For the mapping hit and mapping press, we need to do a check for it. So let's make a simple boolean temp value. We're going to set this to false, and we're going to return it. And this should be boolean. I don't know what I'm doing. Sorry, man. Alright, let's go fix this up here real fast. And this is return bool and bool. Okay, that should fix the problem. So what do we have to do with this? First off, we need to check and see if the mapping dot key using the key is mouse. Otherwise, it's going to be the keyboard. So temp equals, and we're going to be reusing some code here. So mouse button hit, and it's going to be mapping with the key BK. Now, mapping is pretty straightforward. And as you can see, we needed the keyboard and mouse function from before. So we can reuse it. And the reason why we're having this is that, remember, it's an SDL scan code. So let's fix that real fast. There we go. And the mapping press functionality is going to be the same, with the difference being we're reusing the press methods or functions. So that's pretty easy. Let's test this real fast. Before we do anything, let's add a couple of mappings. For starters, let's kind of get rid of this code. And we're going to say add mapping, and let's call this left. And what this is going to be mapped to is mapping, and we're going to have SDL scan code left, which is the left arrow key, and we don't need to do anything because we have a default value there. And add mapping to right, mapping SDL button right to test the mouse. And this is going to be true because we're dealing with the mouse now. There we go. So we should be able to do one of our stereotypical C-outs. So mapping hit is left if mapping hit right. We're simply going to press, simply going to print out std cout, hitting left arrow key, cd let's copy pasta this down here, and we're going to tab it, and this will be simply the right mouse button. Alrighty. So let's build this and see if there's any errors. You never know if there is any. Yes, let's see here. And I forgot to put in parentheses. There we go. And let's test this. Let's see if this mapping stuff works. We left click. Doesn't do anything. Press the left arrow key. Yay, it works. And let's hit the right arrow key. Good. Let's change this to press and see if that works. Press. And press. Left arrow key, left arrow button doesn't work. Arrow button, yay. And right, yay. Mapping is fairly straightforward. However, it can get somewhat tedious once you start introducing configuration. So let's go back to our project here, project 2, test, and we're going to get started doing the file mapping. Now this is a little bit more involved. You need a way to load up a file to get the key configuration, and you need to write out the entire key bindings in a separate list. Luckily for us, I tested it, and I will probably copy and paste some code in from my test project. So let's create a file, and we're going to call it config mapping config.sc. Let's enter this, and we're going to configure this to left equals KB, which stands for keyboard, and it's going to be left, and right equals MB, right. MB is for mouse. So, this is the kind of file format we're going to be using. It's similar to a Java property file for a couple reasons. One, they're easy to parse. Number two, they're simple to read. Let me add in a comment. Let's say these are the key bindings. Alright. So, what will we need? First of all, we're going to need a way to store a list of values, and like before, I think we should probably use a map for it, and we call it mapping, and we're going to call this mapping list. This is a list of all the keys excuse me, and all the buttons we can use from that we can config in the file. So how are we going to read this file? Well, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to copy and paste some functions from my test project, and I'm going to pretty much explain what they do. Here they are. Let's see here. We're going to put these in the utility section. And I'm also going to copy and paste a structure that I made. Right here. Now, what this structure is for, I'm just going to explain this first. This will store both the key. Let's go back to this. The left side right here is the key, and the value is this right here. That's what this property structure handles. And these methods down here does some kind of generalized functionality. This function handles string splits because there's no native C++ function that does this. It will output it into a vector, and it will use a char as a delimiter. Read file basically says it all. It reads a text file and puts each line into a vector. And this is kind of an enhancement of the read file. It reads property files. So let's grab the implementations of these functions right here, and we're going to paste these down below. These are utility functions. Bam. And I probably need to include a couple of things to make sure that there's nothing wrong. So let's include fstring, and it says string. Now, if you come with a C background, the reason why I'm using the C++ stuff is that, to me, they're better to read, and we're only loading this file once, so we don't have to worry about speed at all. But let me explain these functions. First off, I'm placing the string into a string stream. I have a temporary variable called item, and I'm using a while loop to get line. I'm passing it the stream, then I'm getting a temporary value from using item, and it's going to look at the delimiter. And depending on the delimiter, it's going to split up the string and put it into this vector. Read file is pretty much almost the same way without the delimiter. It simply reads each line of the file. As you can see, I'm using if stream to open a file. I'm using a temporary item string, and I'm simply inserting the if stream into get line, and I'm putting its outputting to this item variable, which I'm adding it to a vector. And the read property file basically grabs all the contents using the read file function, and I'm going through and parsing each line. I'm checking to see if there's comments. If it's not a comment, then it will go down here, and which will result in using string split and storing these stuff into a vector, which I'm pushing to this property vector right here, and I'm storing the key as the first value and the value as the second value. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so the next function that we need is going to be static void init mapping. We're going to pass this a string, which is going to be a file. So let's go down here and implement our said function. Here's the mapping section, and we're going to copy paste this right here. So the next thing we need kind of a lookup table for keys, and like the other function before, I'm simply going to copy and pass it to the end, because here's the list that we're going to use. Yeah, that would take a while to type out, so for convenience sake, and because the source code is going to come with the video, you can look at it there. I'm gonna explain it in a minute. Alright, so what I did was pretty much go to the SDL, let's see here, scan codes. There we go. And I pretty much kind of added all these values to it. As you can see here, KBA is the SDL scan code A, and so forth. I went down, I added most of the keys of a kind of a standard US keyboard. There are other scan codes that you might add if you're from, I don't know, the UK, for example. They have different keys on their keyboard compared to the United States. And there's also, I've also added the number pad in too. For the mouse, I'm simply adding mapping using SDL button left and middle right. Pretty straightforward. So, that pretty much sums up what I did with this code. So the next thing we need to do is we need to parse the file that we're going to be adding here. So let's do that. First thing we're going to need is a vector with property. And this will be just simply I'm just going to call pfile. Yeah, pfile is fine. And what we're going to do is use read property file, and we're going to pass the pfile to that, and we're going to pass the fn. What this should do is go through the entire property file right here and separate left and the value and put into this vector. The next thing we want to do is we want to go through the loop I equals 0, I is less than p file, that's size, I plus plus. We're going to go through this file and we're going to grab all the stuff from it. So let's see here. We're going to use add mapping. We're going to use p file I.key, and we're going to grab mapping, the actual mapping itself in the mapping list. We're going to use p file I.value. There we go. So now we should be able to use a file instead of simply adding our key values right here. So let's swap that out with init mapping, and we're going to use that file that we created, which is mapping config. So mapping config .sc. Alright, so let's build our project, and we're going to test this. So I'm still able to hold down the left arrow key, and it's doing that, and I'm holding down the right arrow button on my mouse. But what's really cool about this is that I can change this out. Let's change this to A, and this will be middle. So I'm holding down A, and it's doing the same thing. Are you starting to see the power of this? This basically allows your players, if you're making a game, or users to bind their mouse and keyboard using a file rather than having them go look at your source code. It's a pretty awesome way to handle this. So let's make an example. I'm going to erase all this example code that we had in the past, and we're going to use mapping. So Skype, go away. There we go. Let's change this to left and right. We're going to use the keyboard, KB, right. We're going to have one for up, which is going to be KB up, and down is going to equal KB down. What we're going to do is move around our little cube friend here around the screen like we did on the first video. So we should be able to do something like this. If mapping press is left, else if mapping press is right, we're going to move the box from the left to the right. So pose.x is minus equal to 1, and pose.y is plus equal to 1. So let's test that and compile. There we go. Oops. Oh. Silly me. I did to the Y. But as you can see, it works. It works pretty well. So let's add back in if mapping press is up, else if mapping press is right, then we're going to depose y is minus equal to 1, and pose y is plus equal to 1. So now what we should be able to do is move around like we did in the keyboard tutorial. Oh, I know what I'm doing. Down. There we go. So, I think this is pretty much it for the mapping tutorial. What we learned to do is how to utilize mapping to make give us a lot more control over how we handle inputs. What mapping does, it allows us to do key inputs, or unifies both mouse and keyboard, and if you have a gamepad, it's possible to do that with the gamepad. It allows a player or user to reconfigure the key bindings that you set up. It's fairly straightforward. You simply need to reuse the keyboard functions that you've wrapped up, and you learn. So, until next time. Well, actually, the next kind of SDL-ish or kind of game programming video, I'm still debating what I should do. I'm thinking about either doing it over, say, some basic OpenGL, or I'm thinking about probably doing an actual GUI tutorial, because I've been doing a lot of input stuff, and that might be a fun way to test out how the SDL events work using the power of OpenGL to render. So until then, I will see you all later. Y'all take care.